Hi guys, welcome to Emmanuel's Manual, and we're here to invite guests to talk about different issues like psychology, politics, and even philosophy. But we'll also dab on different issues in life and maybe share our opinions with it. And today I have invited a friend of mine who I know in my university. His name is Akira. And hi Akira, tell me about yourself.
Oh, hi. Hi, Manuel. Thanks for inviting me to the podcast. Yeah, just to give a very brief information about myself, I am a 23-year-old student studying psychology in EDU. And I've met Emmanuel maybe like last semester, and we got along because of our aligned interest when it comes to psychology and philosophy. And I'm grateful to be in your podcast. Okay.
Oh, that's sweet. Grateful to be in my podcast. That's sweet. You're the first guest. So, I don't know if other guests would say something like that too, but I'll be like, oh, that's so sweet. Anyway, anyway. So I
Whatever, dude.
believe that you have, you know, find a topic for us to discuss today. So what's the topic?
Yes, the topic I'll be talking is escapism. So, escapism is when we deal with stressful feelings by indulging into various forms of entertainment. That's a very simple definition I can give off. It doesn't even have to be stressful, it could be anything that we find boring or anything that we have a hard time dealing with.
So you're doing some activities, trying to escape from reality in some ways, right?
Yes, in some sense, yes. Escaping not just from reality, but the uncomfortable feelings evoked from the reality of your situation that you cannot that you cannot cope with head on.
Hmm. Are there any experience that you have with this kind of, escapism?
Yes, I mean, just like everyone else, everyone experiences escapism, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this. I normally escape from problems evoked from deadlines in university, the pressures of schoolwork, by binge watching my favorite shows, playing video games, and reading fiction as a way to feel like this is a really comfortable reality that I'm currently in, and to give me some sense of control when I'm in that reality. But whenever I'm back to doing the task, I realize that I can't do it, and it's actually really hard, and that's one of the reasons to why I keep on going back to indulging into my forms of entertainment.
I
What about you,
guess,
Emmanuel?
well, I guess what you're trying to say is that there's a primary task, there's a main task that you're trying to do, but you're trying to escape from that main task by doing other secondary options to escape that kind of feeling of lack of control and pleasant feeling. And well, do I have things like that? I guess I do, because when I'm studying, and I'm a university student, and when I'm studying, sometimes I feel really stressful, and I'll rather like do something like sleep. I'll sleep to spend my day. I spend my day sleeping to try to like forget about the stress and the work. And back then, there was a period that I didn't study, and I was playing video games all day, trying to escape from the fact that I'm not successful, that I'm not contributing anything, or I'm not succeeding. I guess there's ways that I have when it comes to
Right.
escaping from reality.
I see. I see. I see. And yeah, I think we can. I think I can also both relate to that about that. And I actually want to ask you in that question: when you escape into, let's say, as you what you mentioned, sleeping, is it really to avoid the situation, or is it because you're addicted into the feeling that you experience when you're dreaming?
Well, I'm not a dreamer in the sense that I didn't really have dreams. So even if I have dreams, I'll forget about it immediately when I wake up. So dream is not something attractive, or it's not the main reason that attracts me to sleeping. It's more about spending, how can I say it?
I think it's
Spending the
more of like,
time
yeah,
between the tasks so I can minimize the time that I will spend on being anxious.
I see. I see. Okay.
It's a it's a fair way to really escape from being anxious because I am a really neurotic person, and and I'll be constantly anxious about study when I wake up. So sleeping is a way to like minimize the duration between tasks, so that I have less time to be anxious and less time to be concerned about anything.
I see.
So,
But yeah,
hmm,
I think I
there
want
was
to
what
actually,
tell me.
yeah, I want to actually give my thoughts on this as well in some way that I can relate to. Don't you think that trying to reduce your anxiety by avoiding it actually feeds the anxiety by constantly repeating the cycle? Because I experience the same thing when I try to indulge into my activity to not deal with the problem or anxiety. I feel really comfortable, but I notice that when I'm back to the task, I end up feeling even worse than initially. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you're raising the question of whether like spending time on secondary options or like other options will minimize the time for the primary task, and then feeds more anxious feeling because you have less time to deal with the main task. So I guess that depends on the person. So if you're really minimizing the time you have for the main task, but you're not minimizing it in a way that it goes through the threshold, then maybe it's okay to to escape or to spend time on other tasks. But if it's through the roof, if it's through the threshold, and you have really little time in dealing with the main task, then maybe they'll provoke more anxiety. It depends on the ratio or the amount of time that you spend on other tasks.
I
That's
see.
what I'm trying to say.
So essentially, what you're trying to say, it's all about the amount of balance you can maintain when trying to engage in such tasks, right?
Yeah, that's the balance. And if you can handle the balance in a precise and careful way, maybe that'll be positive escapism, and maybe you know if it's too much or it's in a negative way, maybe it'll become negative escapism. And
Mm-mm.
I guess you want to talk about it too, because
Yeah. Yes. I think it's great that you mentioned this. It makes it easy for me to elaborate on it. Actually, when it comes to escapism, there are various forms of it, ranging from positive and negative forms of escapism. So let me start off with what is a positive form of escapism. A positive form of escapism is when we are motivated to do a task to improve ourselves or to improve or expand our awareness. It's also to maybe draw some inspiration and recharge from a stressful task. It helps with our overall well being. On the other hand, negative escapism, similar to addiction, is when the tasks control us. The form of entertainment controls us and distracts us to fulfill our responsibilities. So, in a way, an analogy would be one would be positive form of escapism would be self expanding, and a negative form of escapism will be self suppressive.
well, I guess the way that you're talking about it reminds me of like or give me some ideas. Maybe I, maybe I'll describe it like, but to me I think that when it expands you, it means it occupy the right amount of time in your life. But if it controls you, then it means they bring negative consequences, which means it goes through the threshold and it controls a large part of your time, sacrificing your time for your main task. And I guess control or not, self-expanding or not, or self-expanding or self-restricting, it depends on whether if it's dominating your main task or like occupying the time you need for the main task. Is it a way to talk about
Yeah,
it?
I think you're hitting the target. Yes, but I also want to elaborate about how not only that, but an important part of describing the differences between negative and positive escapism is how consistent your actions are to your values in life. If the negative escapism you're engaging in is inconsistent with who you want to be and the life that you're trying to live, then that task is controlling you because it's suppressing you and putting you in a comfort zone where you can only stay within your I will just to make a very very strong word, a form of addiction, right?
Hmm.
While on the other hand, with positive escapism, it's to actually chase and continue to pursue a life that you would actually be satisfied in through your habits and lifestyle.
I guess when you talk about goals or like a main theme that we are pursuing, you're defining the main task in the same time defining like the other secondary tasks. And and I guess it's not action specific, but it's more like task specific. When you define the task, you set boundaries, and things beyond that boundary will be described as negative escapism or negative actions. And if it's similar to your goals and your ideals or your values, it will be something that hmm, it will be something that can be called positive escapism in
Right.
a
Yes.
sense.
Exactly. In a sense, that's also part of it. But I think it's mostly on how present you are and how satisfied you are when you're doing the task before, during, and after. For negative escapism, when you're doing the task, you're only chasing the external outcome, the pleasure that the task is giving you, and it creates a cycle of you want that good feeling, and then you end up chasing it over and over and over so that later on when you're back to your normal routine task in your daily life, you're not going to have enough motivation since you're using uh, that reward in your brain, that dopamine in your brain for the task, making it a negative form of escapism.
Hmm. When you talk about external reward and internal reward, I guess if just saying if the external reward that you're pursuing matches the internal reward, that it will be some kind of a positive escapism. But if it's unmatched or like unparalleled or disconnected, that means it may be a negative way of coping.
Yes, yes, exactly. And it's a negative way of coping because we're actually preventing ourselves from applying what we're doing when engaging into escapism into other domains of our life. And I will actually like to elaborate slightly on a tangent right here. Let's say when it comes to positive escapism, right? Let's say I decided to have a new hobby, which is let's say I'm doing archery, right? At first, it's just going to be a mindful activity I would like to do during the weekends. But I realize I'm starting to actually get engaged with it, and I really enjoy it. So I start to implement it, and I start to actually dedicate my energy into improving myself for it, so I can actually maybe compete and teach others how to do archery one day. So it essentially expands my worldview and my life, so that I can actually connect with others. On the other hand, when it comes to negative escapism, if I'm only indulging into, just for example, my experience would be video games, which is fine. But if I let it dominate my entire life, and it prevents me from connecting to others or improving myself in a way where I can actually achieve goals that are consistent with my values, then it will be a negative form of escapism. What do you think?
Because back when I was saying, there's a main task and there's a secondary task. So the primary task or secondary task. I'm talking about whether the action and the task matches. But here you're talking that there's certain hobbies or certain interests, like drawing, singing, or something like that, that may expand your circle, may give you potential benefits comparing to other actions like drugs and alcohol addiction, and other
Yes.
stuff. So what you're
Yes.
saying here is like task specific. What I'm saying is what definition the specific. So
Could you please
I'm talking
elaborate?
about whether like the definition of your main task defines whether it is positive or negative, and you're talking that the tasks themselves can be a general indicator of whether it's positive or negative. And I believe that in some ways, maybe because a task, a main task, or some kind, a good task or good main task, primary task, is kind of similar and healthy. Like we presuppose that it's healthy, and then we'll and then we'll say that there are certain actions contributing to contributing it contributing positive escapism towards that task, and whether some others are generally negative. So I guess there's an underlying notion that what are healthier and what's the one not. And I guess can you elaborate? Do you think that there are any ideas that can connect both worlds from the definition
Uh,
specific to the task specific?
Could you, for our viewers out there, I just want to ask you to elaborate. What do you mean by task specific and definition specific?
So, for example, it's like this: I take drugs because that fulfills me. It makes me explore more of the real world in the in a psychedelic way, I guess. So in that way, that's the main task. And if that's the main task, then drugs addictions may be something that feeds into the ideals or values of that person, making drug addiction a
Mm-hmm.
positive escapism instead of a negative one.
Interesting.
So,
Yes, I think I get what you're saying there. Yeah.
so do you think that
So
that is a general tendency, or it actually differs in people by being task or definition specific?
that's a really great question, and well, I'm no expert here, so I'm only gonna give my view based on what I understand. It's very complicated to break it down because it depends on the person's value structure. Right? Everyone has a hierarchy of values that they prioritize in their life. So just as your example, if a person values engaging into his own inner world, and he finds the action, like let's say doing art or engaging into various substances, then it's it could potentially by logic be a positive form of escapism. But here's my 2 cents here. The issue here are the long term consequences, right? Because if the person is cannot live or has a hard time living without engaging into that form of escapism, and it's affecting other parts of his life that are equally important or at least relatively important, then it wouldn't really be a positive form of escapism as initially mentioned. It has to balance other aspects of his life, and also in the long term for it to be considered a positive form of escapism.
I guess, well, I'll say it in this way. That I think that there's a natural tendency of how we should survive. So we kind of like united in well, our goals or values kind of united in a way that we're seeking reality or seeking how to live perfectly. And there's a similar way or similar tendencies of how we should live. And that tendency makes actions like drawing, singing, playing music, some kind of hobbies that is in the realm of positive escapism, but drugs or alcohol addiction in the negative way of coping. So I guess in some ways our goals and values kind of united towards a similar goal because there's only one kind of way for us to live perfectly. Although there are differences, but there are similar tendencies. And I guess that tendency arranges and distinguishes some hobbies from others by setting some to be positive and some to be negative.
Right, right, right. And yeah, well, I think I also want to add in how even I think the activity has to be considered as well to for it to be overall positive or negative, right? Because, for example, even if an activity might be healthy for a person, for example, exercise, right? Exercise is viewed as a healthy activity for the body, but it can actually be used in a way that is considered negative escapism, right? And by the logic I was mentioning, if you're engaging into the activity and avoiding other parts of your life, and it's controlling you, for example, really very overcommitted fitness addicts, which is fine. But if they also value other parts of their life that but are not meeting it because they are only overindulging into one domain of their life, like let's say fitness, then that would be a form of negative escapism, since it's preventing them from experiencing more of the life that they would actually like to have in the long term overall.
Yeah, exactly. Like it goes back to the point that I was saying about the balance, the precise balance between like dominating other tasks or not dominating other important tasks. So,
Mm-mm-mm.
like if it's exceeding, then maybe there's a problem. Even if it's a healthy behavior, according to the tendency that arranges, what's positive and what's negative. So
Exactly.
there is a tendency, but there's also another like parameter that defines how much of a good action is not good. How much is a
Mm-mm.
good, my quoted good, not really, it's not good indefinite. It's good in a ratio balanced way.
I see. So I think another we can also redefine it as in a way by what is sustainable, right?
Yeah,
How long you can sustain in when indulging into a lifestyle and activity, right?
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think one of the reasons why no matter what your reasons are when engaging into questionable activities, let's say for example drugs, uh, even if it's used within the intention of positive escapism, like they would like to actually engage more into the life that they will actually like and the vows that they have. The reason why it might still be a limited or a slightly more mediocre form of positive escapism instead of true positive escapism is because it's not sustainable in the long term. It's still going to prevent them from actually experiencing the full potential of a life that they will actually be more satisfied in. And I'm not here to tell like how a person should live. I believe everyone should have their own right into determining it, but I believe it's also important to have some self reflection into reflecting and seeing what other aspects of your life are you not fulfilling because of some uh, activities that you're doing at the moment.
Well, I think that the best way to survive is, is to
Maybe, maybe subjective to use best.
it's subjective, but it's also like somewhere objective. Maybe I've mentioned this idea with you before. I believe that it's more in the sense of like pursuing the objective, perceiving the subjective truth in pursuit of the objective truth. So there are some subjective elements that makes people deviate from the truth or from reality. But there's only one reality, one only true and objective reality. And when you talk about whether if there's a tendency, because there's one truth, one reality, there's always one tendency, one like a general tendency, but it It also depends on how you perceive it. But you can still argue with a person who's intentionally doing drugs for some brain mind exploration. You can argue with them about whether if it's the best way to survive life. And so there are different ways to survive life. They all they all, how can I say it? They all join into each other and become one way, and to describe one best way to fulfill life. And
Mm,
and as there's only one way, like one perfect way in a sense, relatively one perfect way, there's only one. Hmm. There's there's one kind of tendency that kind of governs it all.
mm. I think for our viewers out there, do you mind simplifying what you just mentioned, just to make it easier for me to give a concise response?
So, hmm, how can I? So, like generally, like when you're eating, you know that eat too much vegetables or like eat too much meat is unhealthy for your health, something like that. But like there's some sort of objective standard that governs the balance, but in the same time, there are subjective differences. Some people, like Jordan Peterson or his daughter, need to eat meat to survive. So there's some variance, but there's also like statistics. There's a bell shape where people kind of lie somewhere in between the extreme values, and that tendency kind of go towards one truth or one reality and governed by the same objective truth, but
Mm,
there are also variance that scatters around the graph. So what you're trying to do is to, well, when I say one truth, it's not about understanding the one in the middle of the statistic bell shape, but to understand all the possibilities and all the entire data of the bell shape and come to a conclusion of what's better for you. But in
mm,
that bell shape, there's always a general tendency where like what's better and what's not. Like, drinking and smoking and doing drugs. They may be good for some people in the extreme ends, in a really extreme way, with like 0.1,
right.
0.0001, something like that. But if you want to find the truth or find the tendency, you have to look at the whole bar shape and come to a conclusion of, and the conclusion will generally have some kind of tendency of like whether the data gathers around the middle or on the left or on the right. Left
Yes.
screw the right
That
screw.
Yeah, that's a really unique perspective for you to offer. But I think generally for most people, it might be hard to really give a very in-depth analysis regarding what fits for them in their life and what they will perceive as truth. So I
Yeah.
think we can make it more practical, as in just some very simple tips that people could actually use, philosophical, scientific, or as what you mentioned, all of the things you mentioned regarding philosophy and analogies you mentioned. How can they find what fits for them, and how can they actually know what is actually beneficial for them in a whole? That is a very complicated question to answer because everyone is very different and everyone has their own environment,
Yeah, that's why I
right?
say
And,
what there's like a bell shape. There are always extreme ends, but there is a tendency that can make you conclude that drawing in general are a good choice or smoking in general is a bad choice.
mm-mm,
But in the end, maybe you are the ones in the extreme ends of the bell shaped graph, and you have to
right,
go to the conclusion that benefits you the most.
right.
But it really raised a question where like if it's really bad for people in general in the bell shape, is it really good for you? Is
I
it
think that's
really
a
beneficial?
I think that's a really it's a really complicated question outside my expertise, because some people could actually rationalize and justify their own addictions and maladaptive, negative forms of escapism. Some people will actually give reasons to why what they're doing is actually good for them, and anyone who tries to say or criticize them would be they would actually end up being defensive, and that's completely fine. I think everyone has their own right to distinguish and choose what works for them and not. But let's say for other viewers out there who wants to have a different perspective, perhaps we could try to be more open when receiving feedback from our close loved ones, people around us, or throughout our own research when trying to improve ourselves in our life by
And I
looking
guess
at.
that brings
Yeah.
a really important point. When you say you listen to your friends, listen to your family, listen to different people, you're actually gathering data of this bell-shaped graph to know that whether where and how the bell shape looks like. And when you gather enough data, then you make a conclusion of whether that action is good or bad. And
Mm-mm-mm.
and with lack of that data, or lack of truth, you may go on the wrong path.
Right, right. Do you also think that value judgments here might play a big role, like
Yeah,
determining, yes,
I
like
mean,
determining what is a more important factor to consider when balancing the kind of light that you would like when receiving feedback from others.
you mean like whether the values that you have will be influenced by other other people.
And not only that, but also the information you acquire, because don't you think in a way that because we are all biased by
Yeah,
nature,
yeah,
our values will definitely influence the way we accept and refuse information.
yeah.
And I think one important thing I would like to mention. Sorry, yeah.
As I
One
said
important thing I
before,
would like to.
pers-
Sorry.
you're perceiving subjective truth in pursuit of objective truth. You always like the realization is always subjective, but the goal is
Mm-mm.
always objective. So, like,
Right.
because you want to survive, you want to like live a perfect life. If you want to live a perfect life, you have to know it all, like
Mm-mm.
know all the truth, know all the data. But in the end, because you're only slicing a piece of your life, or you're only perceiving your life, not others, your data is limited to some certain extent. You can expand it by asking others, like, what's your opinion on this? What's your opinion on that? And those data will enrich your profile and get you closer to the objective truth. But,
Mm-mm.
you know, no one can really be 100% objective because no one can know it all except God, if you believe in God. And
Mm-mm.
yeah, that's the tricky part. But that's
Right.
also why you need
Yeah.
to seek help from others to really
Right.
do a judgment.
Mm. Uh, I think thank you for actually sharing the perspective. And yes, I think definitely there are multiple perspectives when viewing, let's say, what is beneficial and that works for you when gathering information around you. Religion and your ideologies and so on are something to also be considered in when making value judgments. But I think I also want to raise another key point here is how when we fail to, or when we don't give enough time in reflecting our values, it could actually be quite concerning, because we would be easily influenced by our environment to choose what values to have. And if we acquire values that are not linked to who we are as a person authentically, then we will end up chasing a false sense of reality, and we will end up making false value judgments
So
when
what you're
trying to
tr-
improve our.
So what you're trying to say is that if you're pursuing the wrong goal, then you're having some kind of false certification, something like that.
Yes, you basically get some kind of an illusion of what life you would like, because of the influences in your environment. So, in very simple terms, it's when you let your environment determine what is a good life and what is the life that is suitable for you, that could lead to unsatisfaction. I'm also dealing with that too, and maybe other people are also experiencing that, and it's fine. I think it's fine to accept that we're all in a different stage of life, and it's important to give some time to reflect and have more autonomy when choosing what kind of values we would like to form for ourselves, and what kind of goals or habits we would do and choose to have. So trial
Hmm.
and error, basically. Trial and error from reflection.
Like you remind me of like politics. Like you said about us should have the right and time and decision and the right to make the decision for ourselves to know that what's better for us. So I'm personally a libertarian. I believe in that everyone should have the right and freedom to do what they need or they want because maybe they'll know better about themselves because back just like what I said, will be never able to be 100% objective because we're not gods or any or the universe. And
Yes.
and like I guess the attitude that we have to like the attitude that we have in politics will influence whether you have thoughts like this too. Because maybe some other people will believe like everything is like absolute, like is definitely wrong or definitely right, instead of looking at it as a bell shape or like with extremes on both ends.
Right.
So, but of course, maybe there are actions that are they're like 100% or 99.9% wrong, and you should make choices in determining whether that person is guilty or not. But there are some other stuff or some general talents, hobbies, or maybe like smoking weed that should not be really heavily defined unless
Mhm.
you find more evidence about it.
Right. 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 Yes. Uh, I was also gonna ask if you about your thoughts on just your general thoughts on the society when dealing with escapism. Because I actually wanted to move on to the section where we can talk about how escapism is relevant to society right now, as there are so much more distractions right now and entertainment, and there is so many roles that we're trying to find in this age, so many ideologies and so many groups. So I would like to have a shared discussion on uh, how to actually balance escapism, our personal views, and any thoughts we could give for people out there who wants to hear a perspective in this new era.
Hmm.
Right. So
Well, because we talk about the primary tasks and there's a secondary tasks, and you know whether whether your actions or the tasks that you're doing influences each other. I would say that the most important thing is to really ask and understand what is your main goal. What is a hard thing to do, because we never know and sometimes it will change. But I guess you have to ask someone like Jordan Peterson or a clinical psychologist about how to precisely nail down or to really just discover your main goal so that you can and then build up some kind of principle or discipline to avoid negative escapism. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
discipline is gonna play a really important role in dealing with escapism. But
Definitely.
when we talk about discipline, you have to have a goal or a purpose that you're clear about, so that because your discipline brings you to it's restricting. No, how can I say it? The discipline is following your goal by eliminating the wrong tasks. So there must be a goal in the
Mhm.
first place. And
Right, right.
and to deny escapism or negative ones is to make sure that you're always constantly on the main primary task. And what else is a better way to do it than discipline?
Right, and I completely agree with that. Discipline is really underrated thing right now in society, where everything is all about instant gratification and efficiency. And I'm glad you mentioned this concept, because I will also like to share my views, my personal views, that other people can actually gain a perspective on when dealing with this new information age of and having a healthier relationship with escapism. My one of my views that I find useful, and the philosophies I find useful, would be called Stoicism. Some people might know this already, but for other listeners out there, Stoicism is a ancient Greek philosophy that emphasizes self-control and self-restraint, and being mindful of your actions, and being able to control your thoughts, controlling what you can, and going with the flow with what you cannot control. So I find that living through this philosophy, maybe not living through, but being able to use some of the concepts from Stoicism helped me develop discipline through my habits, actions, and thoughts, and more responsibility for my actions and the other things that has happened when dealing with escapism. It helps me create a healthier balance when trying to limit myself from distractions, so that I can actually focus on what's actually important to me. What do you think?
Well, you said that. I guess stoicism is, as you said, something that control your emotion and control what you can control. Because that's like finding the. Hmm, I get the 2 points that we can mention here. The first of all is that talk about the tendency or the truth. So the more you know, or the more you control, the more you know about what you can control, the more information that you gather, the better you can cope with life and avoid from escaping from it. And the second thing is that controlling our emotions is a way to control our goals or values because it influences our decisions. So,
Right. Right. Yes.
so
And
there's more like an intrinsic or like an inter issue that you're solving, and there's an external issue that's solving. One is the environmental issue. One is the personality or emotional burden or issue.
yes, and I would also like to add in, just for our other viewers, when I meant by controlling your emotions and thoughts, that is not the same thing as suppressing. You're not suppressing your emotions. You're actually taking responsibility for your emotions by mindfully paying attention to them and being present and confronting them inside your mind. So it forces you to actually have the discipline when confronting any negative feelings you're experiencing, and mindfully evaluating them so that you can accept it as you go through life. That is the main difference between self-suppression, which is ignoring your emotions, and being mindful, which is just being in touch with your emotions without it letting it control you.
Well, you bring up a point that's interesting to talk about is that what our mind thinks is best for us or what our emotions thinks that's best for us may be good for the short term, maybe favorable in the short term, but a disadvantage in the long term. So to make the extrinsic environment or the extrinsic goal and the internal goal connected, you have to control the short term unstable and healthy emotions. By
Yeah.
controlling them, it opens you the door into right emotions that will bring you to the the outer external goal that you should be pursuing.
Yes, and I think I would also like to add in here, just another philosophy that might be more useful, because Stoicism does help with taking responsibility and building character, and for controlling your actions. But I think in my view, it might not be the best option for determining what's best for you in your life. And I think to combine another philosophy with Stoicism briefly, uh, it's called existentialism. So, what is existentialism? Existentialism is basically a philosophy that describes how, because from that philosophy, life is meaningless. But because life is meaningless, that means everyone has the freedom, free will, that may be debatable, but free will to determine what fits for them in their life, and what they do in their life gives them meaning in this meaningless world. Their actions and everything that they do is already meaningful enough and defines their life story. So I think when combining existentialism and stoicism, you're able to have the utility of self-discipline and control when trying to approach or pursue a kind of a life that you find meaningful and that is consistent with the values you find as authentic. And I
Can you
think
give
those
me
two
an
philosophies
example?
yeah,
Can you
an
give me an
example.
example about of how you find meaning in a meaningless world?
Right. That's a very subjective question, but I'll try my best to give a very simple term. Just a very simple explanation is when you're able to feel present and mindful and connected with the task that you're doing or with anything that you're doing, and when you're having the pure enjoyment and just intrinsic enjoyment of the task, that would be considered as a meaningful pursuit, a meaningful activity.
I don't know if like existentialism, like the definition of it, say that there's a meaningless world and you're seeking meaning in a meaningless world. Because to me, I think that intrinsic enjoyment or the consequences that comes with an action is already meaningful. So there's always intrinsic value in all all the matter and all what matters in the world. And I think that the interaction is already creating meaning. So you're seeking meaning from value evaluation, but you're not like it's not that the world is meaningless. It's just need time to understand and to learn about the values and evaluate whether what's meaningful and what's not.
Yes. Uh, and I think just to connect back with what you said of subjective truth and objective truth. I think this is what I'm trying to mention when linking it to existentialism, because everyone, the world out there are just facts out there, but we as humans are not wired to actually perceive it for how they are. We make meaning and connections to all the facts around us, and we make a narrative with how we interact with everything around us. So that narrative definitely drives the creation of our values, which then determines what kind of life that we would find as authentic. What you
Hmm.
mentioned as subjective truth, authenticity, and the
Yeah,
meaningless world out here is the objective facts. Well,
yeah.
I
To
mean,
to
yes,
understand the value of different objects or different interaction, you have to be honest about it. That's why people say lying is not a good thing, or lying is not a healthy thing for your mind. Because when you're lying to someone, you're lying to yourself too. And
yes,
and through like interactions, honest ones, we can gather data of what is true and help us to distinguish our own goals, values, and stick with it. And use discipline to stick with it, and then
yes,
gradually expand ourselves, just like you mentioned way back then.
yes, exactly. And I think just for our other viewers out there, by truth, you can by truth, what I was trying to also mention is anything that you pursue as consistent with your values and consistent with how you perceive reality, that will be considered a subjective truth.
Yeah.
And if we cannot perceive objective truth for how it is, then we can only at least get to the circle around it,
We
be
can
close enough
perceive a
to.
slice of, objective truth. Everyone enjoys a slice.
Yes, we're basically in the range of it. Maybe not exactly at it, but at least
Yeah.
within the range of it to benefit from it
Yeah,
when
that's when,
forming
when
our
we talk about, there's a region, it means there's a little more like a gravitational force that, make us stick together closely as a cluster. And that's also why we can communicate, just like, us two in
Yes,
podcast. Because there's a cluster,
exactly.
there's a gravitational force that creates a relative distance. If the whole thing exploded, just like everyone is infinitely apart, where there's no relative distance, then
Right.
we can't even compare and talk about it.
Exactly. So basically, because there are elements of truth, there is
Yeah,
at least some elements of the capacity to perceive and to make intelligible conversations. Otherwise, without elements of truth, there wouldn't be any capacity to comprehend information. Everything will be purely chaotic. And it's true, everything is chaotic, but there's also a balance of order out there.
yeah, and
When
the
it comes
order
to
or
truth.
the gravitational force that you talk about creates that tendency of what tends to be the best choice and what tends to be a bad choice. So
Exactly.
so
And I think it's a, yeah, sorry.
I think it's important for our listeners to be reminded that although there are extreme values in a bell-shaped graph, there are always a tendency, and you're always probably you're not the extreme ones in the values. And even if you're the extreme ones, extreme values, you're still in a gathered cluster. Your values are still. It's like smoking. Even if you're in the extreme end of smoking or of smokers, that that you can get less harm from smoking, you're still being harmed by smoke. So
Right. Right.
there's a tendency that, or there's still a region that fixates you in a way that is still bad for you. It's not like, oh, it must be good for you. Like, not really.
Right. Right. Yes. And I guess in another way, we can also add in how, because there are some shared experiences that everyone can perceive in this
Hmm.
reality. That's what you
Yeah.
mentioned, elements of truth, because it's shared experiences. Uh, our This is where our individuality and our ability to think for ourselves will be important, because we all want to have a life that is, well, at least generally, most people would like to have a life that they would find consistent to their values, that they would find as a very meaningful or enjoyable and tolerable life. And because of that, they will all need to find some kind of value structures within the facts around them to make their life a lot more sustainable. But if they're influenced easily by their environment around them, people, the opinions of society, and so on, then that will definitely taint their ability to think for themselves. I myself included too. And I think that ability to just reflect on your own and have that humility will be essential when being able to access your authentic self in making value judgments. That would
But
be
when
my
you
personal view.
but when you talk about maybe the crowd is misleading, and then we just a few minutes before we talk about that we gather information from friends and family.
Yes, it's a balance actually. What I'm
Yes,
trying to
there's a
mention there
balance.
is a
You have to gather information, but maybe it's wrong, maybe it's right. How to distinguish it from well, how to distinguish good from bad? Part of it comes from like your own experience, your own open experience on that matter. Just like someone tell you that you know Apple is gonna float and fly into the air. There's no gravity, but you experience a world that there is gravity, then who do you gonna believe? Are you gonna believe in the guy or believe in yourself? So there is more like, so how do you distinguish? I guess it's from personal experience, personal repeated experience, and
Right.
maybe a better selection of friends and family
Yes.
advice.
And I think that brings back to my our conversation far back, value judgments, right? Being able to e- evaluate everything that you've gathered, and then including feedback from people around you, professionals and so on, and then being able to reflect independently with that choices that you made, and the feedback that you got from others. That is what I'm trying to say when balancing being able to be independent and cooperating with others in your self-improvement journey.
Right, right.
Yes.
How to balance your own like the data that you collect by your own perception and data that you collect from family and friends or strangers. But also in some way, I have to clarify that when you are gathering data from your friends and family, it's also part of your perception. So it's not really like they are mutually exclusive. They're more like some kind of like your perception is includes other people's advice.
Yes. Yes.
But
And
like, yeah, talk
mm,
about it.
yeah, I think this might be a bit complicated for to discuss because I myself is also going through it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what's important is just to really go through trial and error and being able to evaluate what works for you and what doesn't work based on patterns you can find in the past that is not consistent with the values that you have, and analyze why did it not work, what is causing that problem, and how can you actually change that thought process in the future, and being able to create a mental model in the future when you're dealing with similar situations that contains the same things that cause you to act that way.
Do you think that you're confident in what you believe or confident in your goals or your values?
I'm sorry, you're asking me if
Yeah. I'm asking, do you think that you are, you are, or do you think that you will be confident in your own values or
I think not really confidence, but
goals?
just the trust and faith and humility when going through the process of your experiences and thoughts in life.
Yeah, being
Because
humble
yeah.
is a really, really important point.
Yes, and I think that is a very essential point right now in society. As well, at least being humble definitely opens you to a perspective that you have not considered because of overconfidence. So I think being able to be humble and having some trust and faith in yourself throughout the process is essential when learning from the past and when going to the future.
Yeah, but like being humble is like you have to remind the audience that being humble doesn't mean that you shouldn't take action or you should be scared of taking actions. Being humble is like not being aggressive towards others, but in the same time being disciplined and go towards your own goals and values.
Yes, exactly. But the definition I actually wanted to use when I meant by humble is the humility you have towards yourself and towards reality. Well, I mean, your perception of the environment, to make it more clear.
Hmm.
Uh, because when we stay too fixated into our concepts, into our ideas, we end up failing to see the bigger picture on what is actually causing that problem. And that is why humility, in a sense where you're able to open yourself into a different perspective and also admit that you might be wrong sometimes, and including me, everyone else, I'm wrong a lot of times too, will definitely give us some wisdom and insight for making changes in our life.
Yeah, that reminds me of something. It's to like not give up pursuing, the truth, or the goal or the values in a sense, because although we know that we cannot become objective 100%, but our lives go towards the tendency or our life is a pursuit of the objective
Mm,
truth or reality. So we have to be constantly pursuing and not giving up. Because some people give up and say like, "Oh, my world is subjective. Like I believe in what I want to believe," and but
right.
it's a really dangerous thing. Not just to others. It's more like to them. They are not grounded when they refuse to ground with the objective reality. They're actually abandoning the safest way to survive, or the safest pursuit to survive.
Right, right, right. And I think we can also link that to the fixed mindset in a way, right?
Yeah,
Where they're only staying in a zone that they find as comfortable, but might actually be, in a very extreme sense, be quite poisonous because it's limiting themselves uh, from actually achieving what they want. And even worse is when they end up regretting in the future, leading to resentment about what they could have done in their youth.
what a tough life.
Indeed.
It's kind of is.
Mm. But I think I also want to just share, like, I'm really grateful I get to have this podcast with you. I've
Yeah,
actually been escaping a lot recently, and I'm sure everyone else can also have their own different forms of escapism. But the main takeaway I would like for everyone to know is that we're all in this together, and that we should definitely be more open-minded sometimes with our experiences, so that we can learn and to have enough time for self-reflection, so we can have a healthier relationship with escapism and
and
a more,
discipline.
yeah, definitely, and a more fulfilling life, which is subjective.
Hmm.
Yes.
Anything else?
Uh, I think that's my main takeaway and my main points:
Hmm.
self-awareness, discipline, and responsibility, and balance,
Well,
of course. What about
yeah,
you?
I would say about balance, discipline, and continue pursuing, the truth for your own survival.
Yes,
That's the
your own
main
truth.
takeaway. Well, not your own truth, you perceive it, but only saying that is, if it's only saying that your truth is important is neglecting the important the importance of objective reality because you're surviving in the reality, not outside of reality. So you're constricted in a sense. So you have to be humble towards your subject. Be humble towards truth because you know that you're perceiving subjective truth, but you're also being humble because you know that there's an objective truth that you're pursuing, and that
Mhm.
goal is something that's unreachable, but something that you still need to pursue.
I
Yeah.
see. So I think in a way, just to elaborate further on what you mentioned, I
Hmm.
think basically it's to be humble enough so that you'll be able to perceive more of reality and more of truth, so
Yeah.
that your subjective truth will be a lot more refined and more just more consistent with who you want to actually be.
It will be you getting closer to the objective reality. So, that's why I call it the goal, because you're attracting yourself towards the truth. But truth is also the objective truth is also increasing and expanding. So you can become it, but you can get closer to it, and that's the
Right.
point.
I see. I see. So I guess in a very poetic way, you could just say it's to be closer and one with reality.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
it's just like, we'll talk about it maybe next podcast or some other
Sure.
time. But it's just like mindfulness. When you're mindful, you're feeling your body and you're engaging in reality. You're actually getting closer to the reality by believing they're subjective, or engaging in a way that's less subjective, less thinking, more engaging in the objective reality by feeling the world. So it's a
Right,
way to
right.
get yourself more connected to reality, and to be more connected, there are different ways, But after being more connected, you're getting closer to the truth in a sense.
I see. But I think, don't you think in a way it's actually complementary? Like both of them, subjective truth and engaging with, as what you mentioned, objective truth, benefits each other because everyone has their own essence of what they view as important, and when they open themselves into reality, objective truth,
Yeah.
what you mentioned, they'll be able to find some other things that they might be missing when following their subjective truth. And when they do that, they will be able to have a more stable sense of who they are and a more refined subjective truth, as what I already mentioned.
I guess the beauty lies in the imperfection comparing to the objective truth. And the
Yes,
beauty is to seek perfection, but understanding you're imperfect. And so that's why I tell others to keep pursuing. Even we know that we're imperfect, but but the journey needs to go on.
yes, exactly. It's that humility and persistence that makes the journey quite, that's what I would mention and say
Yeah.
again, meaningful. Yeah,
So
basically, we're all the actors of our own life.
actors of our own life. Yeah.
Yeah,
To some extent.
but it's basically it.
Basically
It's
it. So we're gonna end it here, huh?
right. For our
Oh,
viewers out there, thank you for listening.
wait. Do
This
you
is
wanna
our first podcast.
wait? Do you wanna leave your show something like that?
Yeah, sure. Well, my social media for anyone who's interested. If you get to tolerate this podcast, my social media is my name is just Akira. Feel free to follow me and give your feedback. I would appreciate it.
And I guess for me, I'm not gonna tell others, because I'll probably write it in the bottom of the podcast. I'll write yours too. Anyway,
Shy boy.
shy boy. Okay, shy boy. I'm not
Always
shy.
that.
Am I?
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe. But anyways, whatever. See you. Thank you
See
very
ya.
much.
Good
Right,
talk.
right. Good talk. Good talk.